Hey TCSTV viewers, it's Evelyn here coming to you live from the camera store tonight. Thank you so much for joining us for this TCSTV Live composite landscape photography with Cath Simard, sponsored by Sony Canada. And this is our second presentation with Cath this month, and we've really enjoyed her first one, giving you guys an introduction to her and her work. And this goes a little bit deeper, but Sony's awesome team put this together with us, as well as some exclusive Sony offers through the camera store. And so we have these just in time for the virtual event. So if you head over to thecamerastore.com, you can see all of the deals that we have right now on full frame cameras with some bonus accessories. It's thecamerastore.com to shop for Sony. And we also want to offer you guys $20 off of Cath's workshop that's coming up on June 12th. And this is a full immersion into composite landscape photography. Normally it's $160. With the $20 promo code, you're going to get in for $140. There's only 15 spots total. So it's going to be a very intimate and interactive experience with live editing. So the link is in the description below, as well as the promo code. It's just TCSTV, and that's going to get you $20 off the June 12th workshop. And of course, if you're enjoying all of these TCS TV live presentations, be sure to subscribe to our channel, The Camera Store, and make sure you hit the notification bell to be updated on all of our live events on the spot. You can also go over to our events tab at thecamerastore.com and see what we have coming up next. I will let you know that we have an exciting one June 10th with Atiba Jefferson. And that's going to be exciting. It's about action and skateboarding photography, so don't miss that. And tonight, if you want to ask some questions, you can do so by putting them in the chat. We have lots of people already commenting there. People from all over the place. We have from France, Nova Scotia, Toronto, Calgary, and just people from all over the place. So thanks again for joining us. And of course, I'm thrilled to introduce you to Cath Simard. She is an incredible landscape photographer. She's a role model for taking the leap into her passions and into her career. She's a digital artist who has a clear passion for the outdoors and a keen eye for capturing breathtaking landscapes. And tonight she's going to demonstrate how composite photography can expand your creativity. She'll go over 7 of her best composite images and reveal detail in the story and her creative process. So I hope you guys enjoy this. And let me introduce you to Cath. Hey, Cath.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here tonight.
Thanks for joining us. And it's so exciting. It feels like it was just yesterday we did our introduction to your landscape photography. And I thought it was just such an inspiration to see all of your work and all the different things that you do, especially now that you're living in the Rockies, not too far from Calgary. Can you tell us a little bit about what's your latest adventure been like?
Yeah, so I haven't been out so much lately because I've been working very hard on my latest NFTs. But I think my last adventure was to Berry Lake in Kananaskis. So a really cool spot, about an hour to get up there, and the viewpoint is really beautiful. So I got to shoot a little bit the sunset over there, and hopefully more adventures soon.
Oh yeah, no bears this time?
No bears this time. Hopefully it stays like this.
Sounds good. Well, I'll let you take it away because we have lots to cover tonight. So why don't you go ahead, share your screen, and we'll get right into it.
That sounds good to me.
Awesome.
Perfect. So thank you very much for everybody who is joining today. I'm really excited to be sharing a bit more about my journey. And just to introduce myself quickly for the people that haven't been here before. So I am a Sony Alpha ambassador. I started photography about 5 years ago, and I traveled all over the world. I've been to Patagonia, Peru, Iceland, and I've been to the Canadian Rockies many times. And that's one of the reasons why I decided to make the Canadian Rockies my home. And a little bit more about the gear that I use to start with. I shoot Sony, and I now have the Sony a7R III, which is not shown here. I also have the Sony A1, which I'm very excited to use. I haven't had the chance to test it out, but hopefully in the next few weeks. And as for the lenses, I have the 12-24 f 2.8 G Master the 16-35 f2.8 G Master, the 2470 f2.8 G Master, as well as the 70-200 G Master. So I really like to have the entire range. So I have the choice to use the lens that I need in order to create my composites and all sorts of style as well. As for the accessories, I always have with me some cleaning kits, just in case, sometimes the weather becomes a little bit rough. And also I have always a headlamp with me because most of my work is shot at night, and I want to see where I'm going. So I usually have one or two with me. I also use some filters, mostly polarizing filters. I don't really use anti-filters because most of my work is shot at night. So to do long exposures, I usually only use the low light conditions if I want to create some really cool effects in the water or in the sky. I also have the Garmin InReach Mini, which allows me to stay safe on the trail, especially when I am alone in the wilderness. I always need at least one emergency plan. So that Garmin is pretty cool because it has a little SOS button that allows me to contact the emergency in case I need it. And as for the tripod, I have been using the Manfrotto Elements for the last 3 years. It's been beaten up pretty bad and it's still standing. And it's pretty lightweight, so it's actually perfect for hiking and backpacking. As for the SD cards, I usually use the Sony Theft cards. And then for the backpacks, I have tried so many backpacks, and I think my favorite brand for now is Lower Pro. So I have a few different models. I also have the Atlas bags, which are pretty good. So this is my favorite camera setup for hiking, for backpacking, and also to create my composites. So if I go in the wild, I will usually try to minimize the weight as much as possible and only pick one camera body and one lens. And usually the 16-35 f2.8 G Master from Sony is enough in order for me to create my composites. And I would say also that perhaps 90% of my entire work is shot with that particular lens. So today I'm going to go over 7 composites that I have created over the last few years. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the creative process behind it. And I'm going to go over different techniques, including focus stacking, panoramas, focal length blending, drone photography, and also getting creative with your images, with your edit, and while creating composites. So this is actually some of the first composites that I have created back in the days, back in 2016, 2017. And it's been pretty funny to see the evolution of my composite journey. And I remember when I started, really, it was a pure way for me to express myself creatively, but also to overcome camera limitations. So I remember I was in the Canadian Rockies and also in New Zealand, and then I would get frustrated with single shots and with all the noise that would get introduced in the single shots. And also the more desaturated and less contrasting colors that would happen, even if I would do a 30 to 2 to 5 minutes exposure. So then I decided to start experimenting a little bit more with my technique and photograph the foreground either at blue hour or either at different times, like, for example, like sunset, like the image on the left here, which is a composite that is made of a sunset foreground that was taken at Moran Lake and then a night sky. And then I started to push my experimentations and my techniques even more. And that's how I kept evolving through the years. Also, funny story, the image here from Peyto Lake, if you guys here in the audience are from the Canadian Rockies, you probably know that the moon does not rise like this above the horizon. But I remember that I just really wanted to be super creative with it and just do a creation that was not the goal to stay true to reality. I just really wanted to express myself and to experiment with editing. And then we have the image on the right over here, which is actually a time blend. And this is Mount Taranaki in New Zealand, if I pronounce it well. And I remember I spent the night over there and I shot the sunrise and I shot the night, but without moving the camera. So then I blended the night sky with the foreground that was taken at sunrise. And that's how I created my time blend. However, this is probably some of the very few time blends that I have in my entire portfolio, because after this, I just realized that I much more prefer to be creative with my composites and not limit myself to not moving the position of the camera in order to create something that is realistic, because this is usually not my goal. Now, what is the difference between a time blend and a composite? So time blends it's a special exposure blending techniques, which is usually used to combine several photos of the same scene, but that have been taken over an extended period of time. So why do we time blend? Usually it's to stay true to reality in a landscape photography context. And this technique is ideal if you want to stay true to the natural landscape and have a natural sky that would rise behind a foreground, for example. So as an example, I go somewhere, I want to capture the landscape doing a time blend. So I would position the camera on the tripod, and then I would take a shot at blue hour, and I would leave the camera on the tripod for a few hours until it's night, and then come back to the tripod and take another shot at night with different settings. And then I would blend everything together. So nothing has moved, and I was able to capture the natural sky that would rise behind the foreground. So this usually allows you to create an image that could not be possible in a single shot. And when I say that, it's usually about the contrast and the colors that happen when you do blue hour blends. Usually the colors are way different than if you would do a long exposure at night. So that also allows you to minimize the noise. And then composite, what's the difference between time blends and composite? So composite, it's a technique that combines different photos that were taken at different moments and locations. So for example, taking the same situation that I told earlier, I could come to a location, take the foreground at blue hour, and then just move the position of the camera in the back and then photograph the sky in the back that maybe the Milky Way would be there or another cool clouds or something, and then mix two images together. So this is when we are talking about a composite. I could also photograph the foreground and then drive somewhere else where I can see the Milky Way or the Northern Lights, and then mix both images together in order to create a composite. So usually people choose to create composites to overcome camera limitations. So that allows you to create images that have a minimum of noise. Also, sometimes camera safety and just the general safety. For example, if you would go at the top of a mountain at sunset, and then you would need to stay at night, and then you would need to scramble down at night, and it would be very dangerous. Doing composites would avoid putting yourself in dangerous situations. So this is one of the reasons why someone would choose to create a composite instead of a time blend. Also, one of the main reasons for me to create composite is really for creative interpretation of the landscape and creative expression. And the goal with my work is not to stay true to reality, but rather to create a new reality out of different elements. So this is the first composite that I want to show you, and it's a pretty simple one. And this composite was created at Lake O'Hara in British Columbia. And basically, I spent a few days over there with one of my friends, and we decided to go up this viewpoint at sunrise, if I remember correctly. And we took a shot at blue hour at sunrise, and then we came back to the campsites, we hung out, and at night we went by Lake O'Hara Lake, and then we photographed the Milky Way separately. So I could have arrived earlier, but I had the PhotoPills app, or more precisely, the PhotoPills or the Sky Guide app, which allows me to see where the position of the Milky Way will be depending on a particular location. And I saw that the Milky Way would not rise perfectly at that particular spot. And I remember when I came to that spot, shooting at blue hour, I really had in mind that Milky Way coming from the center of the mountain. So that's why I choose That's why I chose to come back, wait, and then shoot the Milky Way separately. So here you can see both elements of the composite, and 25 seconds, f2.8, ISO 6400, and that's actually a vertical panorama of 2 shots. And then we have the blue hour shot, which was shot right before sunrise. And one of the reasons why I love to create blue hour night composite is that usually the tones and the contrast, they fit really well together. And it usually allows me to create something that is a little bit more realistic compared if I would have shot the foreground during daytime and then try to cool everything off to mix it with the night sky. It would be very difficult for me to do that. Possible, but very difficult. So that is why I love to create blue nighttime composites, to create something that is a little bit more harmonious in terms of colors and contrast. So for the editing here, I just did some basic adjustments in Lightroom, and then I brought everything in Photoshop, merged the 2 images together, flipped the sky to create a slight reflection in the water that I'm not sure if you can see here, but if you zoom in, there are some little stars in the water. Also, I added a little bit of haze just down the valley, just to try to enhance the entire mood and blend the sky and everything a little bit more together. I did some dodging and burning, and then once everything was done, I did some final adjustments in Lightroom. This is the second image that I want to present to you, and it's one of my favorite images that I have created. So this image was created during a high altitude trek in Peru back in 2019. And I remember that I saw a really cool image from one of my favorite photographers, Max Rive, and he photographed this spot during daytime, and it was very warm colors with the sun shining. And I remember seeing his photos and being very intrigued by the landscape and very inspired by the composition and very inspired to go there and really kind of like interpret this landscape in my own personal way. So that was one of my main motivation to go there, to go explore the region and then go do this trek. So the trek started pretty high altitude, around 43,000 meters, if I believe, very high altitude. I only had 2 days for acclimatization, which is not enough when you start at a really high altitude like this. And then we hiked every day for about 12 hours. We were waking up really early in the morning in order to access the most beautiful viewpoints at night and for sunrise. And most of the time I would capture the Milky Way at night from the campsite with the intention to maybe do something with it. So I remember this particular viewpoint was on day 5 of the trek, I believe. And we woke up at 2, we went up a really steep mountain pass, which was around 5,600 meters. And then I took a photo from the top of the pass, which was a little bit similar to that view. I could see the mountains, I could see the lake, but then I took the photo and I realized that it was only the tip of the Milky Way, which is not shown here, that was rising behind the mountain. And I was not really a fan of it. So I already had in mind that I had photographed the Milky Way from the campsite the day before, and that I would be able to use it if I'm able to photograph the foreground in the way that I have pre-visualized it. So then I went down the pass, and then the sun was slowly rising, and I had to really hurry because I really wanted to photograph the foreground at blue hour in order to create a nighttime composite. So I reached up this particular spot. I found the first kind of fluff of cactuses, which I'm not sure exactly what it is. It has a Spanish word, but I found this, and then I did a focus stack. And then after this, I positioned my camera and then shot the middle ground. So these are the pieces of the composite. So you can see the night sky, which is a panorama of 2 images, and then the focus stack, which is a stack of 3 photos, and then the middle ground photo, which was shot a little bit too late. It was actually quite difficult for me to harmonize the colors with the foreground and then to create something that was looking good for a nighttime composite. But I took it anyway, and then I was able to create something that made sense. So for the focus stacking, really quickly for people who don't know about focus stacking. So when you do focus stacking, you want to have everything as sharp as possible. So that's one of the reasons why you would do focus stacking. Yes, you can shoot a single shot at 16 millimeters, but if you are photographing an element that is really close to the camera, even if you shoot f/22, the background and the middle ground will stay out of focus. So focus stacking really allows you to have everything sharp front to back. So usually how it works is that you will position your camera, you will select a particular frame and a framing, and then you will move your focus point either manually or with the automatic focus, moving the focus point a little bit from front to back. And this can be done multiple times. It can be done 2 times, but personally, I like to overdo it just to make sure that when I come back home, I don't come back and then there's a missing part of the image that is out of focus. So this usually allows me to be very precise in my focus stack when I come back and really have something that is super sharp. Now for the middle ground, I shot it at also f/16. I remember I was tired, whatever, photograph the cactus, reposition the camera, shoot the foreground just before the sun is rising. And then the Milky Way, which is a vertical panorama. And I shot it at ISO 8000, which is pretty high. It's pretty high. However, usually when I do panoramas, I like to keep in mind that by doing panoramas, it also increases the amount of overall pixels. So then the noise appears smaller. So that's one way to minimize the appearance of the noise. Now for the editing, I merge the panorama in Lightroom. I love to merge. I like to start by merging all my panoramas in Lightroom. In general, I think it's usually the tool is pretty good. Then I used Topaz denoise, which I will show you right after. And then I did some color grading, some basic color grading in Lightroom. So then I try to match the foreground and then the middle ground with the nighttime as much as I can before bringing everything in Photoshop. And then I did the focus stack in Photoshop. And then I assembled the foreground, the middle ground, and the background in Photoshop. And then I finished with some special effects or light effects, some dodging and burning, some Orton effects in Photoshop as well. And you will notice that for most of my images, I love to add some light at the base of my sky. I think it really helps increasing the overall depth. And especially here in this particular composite, because I shot it a little bit too late, you can see that on the mountain on the left, there is some light that is reflecting on the mountain. So I wanted to flip the original Milky Way and then position the Milky Way core in a way that it would fit with the natural light that is hitting the mountain. So that is purely a creative decision. It is not a decision to respect, what was true or what was natural. And I think that the overall and the final composite is a way more balanced in this way, and the light makes a little bit more sense. Now for Topaz denoise, it is so easy to use. It is a plugin that you can use both in Lightroom and Photoshop. It is literally one click. When you go to filter, edit in Topaz denoise, it brings the photo in this software, and then it has an automatic kind of settings, but then you can also play with the noise, with the sharpness, recover original details, and you can see here how good it is and how much it is eliminating the noise, but also preserving the stars. And I feel that this is something that is usually very difficult to do. So that's why I love to use this. And that's why I don't really bother tracking, especially when I am doing a trek or a hike. It's just added material that I don't necessarily want to have. Now, this is another of my favorite composites. I'm actually dropping this one tomorrow as an NFT on Super Rare. And there's just so much work behind this image. It is definitely the image that needed the most physical work, I would say, in order to achieve. So I've been to Assiniboine 3 times. The first time I went with my friends. I explored the area. The weather was horrible, and I did not really photograph anything. The second time, I was in the Canadian Rockies for a very limited period of time. And I only had 2 days free. And I decided to hike into Assiniboine with all my camping gear, with my Sony A7 III and my 1635, a little bit of food, not too much food, my tent, just in case they would have cancellations, because it is very difficult to reserve at Assiniboine. As a fact, I've been trying to reserve for the last 2 weeks and it's been impossible. Everything is sold out after 30 seconds, but that's another story. So I hiked in the 30 kilometers, asked a park ranger if they had any cancellations. They said no. So I knew that I would not be able to sleep that night, and the weather was not looking so great. So I decided to drop all my camping gear at the campsite and then hike up this viewpoint, which is, I think, 3 kilometers from the campsite. And I kind of like scouted the place, and I was trying to see if I could find a different way to approach this scene. And then I found that cave, which is just on the side of the trail. Most people don't even realize that it's an overhanging cave. And I really, really liked it. And, you know, the weather was not great once again, but I ended up spending the night up there without really sleeping, and just waiting for the morning to come without really taking any photos, because it was raining and really windy the entire night. And then I hiked back without sleep the next day, 30K. So it was, you know, a full, very intense hike. Could not walk for a few weeks after that. But then last summer, I went back to this spot and I remember that cave, and I had time to think about how I want to approach this scene. And I really, really wanted to do something with that cave that I found. So I hiked again. I spent a few days there waiting for the sky to clear. And I think on our last night, the sky cleared. We went up there and I found the cave again. I photographed the cave at blue hour, which you can see over here. Then I got out of the cave. I repositioned the camera to photograph the foreground. And then I stayed up there for the stars to come out. And funny story, the Milky Way rises perfectly behind Assiniboine. And I remember my friends, you know, taking photos of the Milky Way perfectly rising behind Assiniboine. But I knew that I wanted to include the cave in my final composites. And I knew that including a Milky Way on top of this would be too busy in the final composition. So I took a few photos, but I just turned the opposite side. And then I photographed the sky separately just to have a clear, you know, night sky only with stars. And then I created this composite. So the creation of the composite took me a few hours of trial and error. Because I had put so much work into creating this image, I really wanted the final edit to represent, you know, how much I worked to create this shot. So I spent about 40 hours trying a bunch of different stuff, starting over. I have the bad habit to, when I get to a point where I feel stuck, I just delete the file completely, even sometimes past the assembling of the composite. So I decided to delete the files a couple of times, which, you know, adds a lot of time. And then once I reached a point where I was satisfied, which was on the left, I remember that feeling. I was like, I really like the colors. I love the composition, but there's something missing. And that's when I was trying to think about how can I improve the mood? Like, this needs more dramatic mood, and this is a little bit too saturated in the blues. So then I desaturated the blues, and then I added just a tiny bit of fog down the valley, which really helps increase the overall perspective of the composite instead of being very kind of like linear. So this is the story of this composite, and I'm really proud of it, and it has a lot of great memories for me. So about the editing, so I did the basic color grading in Lightroom, and then once again used topaz denoise. I did the focus stack in Photoshop. I assembled everything in Photoshop, and then I tried to color grade the pieces separately as well. So basic color grading in Lightroom, keep doing the color grading in Photoshop, trying to match as much as possible. And then I added all the effects at the end, dodging and burning, the haze, etc. Also, a little bit of light at the base of the sky, which is, once again, something that I like to do a lot. Now, for this composite, I created it this winter, and I have been visiting a lot of different ice caves over the last few years, but mostly in Iceland. So I was really excited to go explore the glaciers in the Canadian Rockies. So I planned with my friends to go visit a glacier and go a little bit later during the day and then stay overnight. So most of them, we had the safety gear, avalanche training, etc. And it had some risk related to that, but we're prepared. And I had probably way too many layers with me. And I remember it was very cold when we stayed at overnight. It was probably down to minus 30. Yeah, it was an experience. But basically, we arrived right before sunset, and then we explored the glacier. And for me, I really wanted to find an ice cave. That's what I wanted. There were a lot of like cool arch. There were a lot of like cool pieces of ice, but I never took out my camera because I was too obsessed with the idea to find an ice cave. So we found that arch, and it's an arch. It's not really an ice cave. We found that arch, and I only had my 12-24 Sony f2.8. And I wanted to try to experiment with the distortion from the lens, which, when you shoot ultra wide, everything looks so much bigger than what it is. So right after sunset, I came back to this, and that's where I took out my camera. And you can see here the little pieces. So very kind of greenish. I remember taking the photos and not loving it. But at the same time, I knew that I would take the time to improve the colors and everything. And it was very messy, like lots of footsteps. And I took the photos anyway. I was not super convinced. And then I came back home, and then I let the images sit for about a month and a half in the hard drive. And I remember there's one night I just felt creative, and I decided to check out the files, and then I started to experiment. And unfortunately, the panorama that I took did not merge either in Lightroom or Photoshop. So I had to manually merge all the pieces together in order to create the final image. And that was very difficult. And also for the colors, it was very challenging. So I merged everything manually in Photoshop. And then I used, once again, Topaz denoise to reduce the noise of the sky, which I took afterwards. I did some of the color grading in camera, since I directly just imported everything raw in Photoshop. I sometimes like to use camera raw instead of starting with Lightroom. And then I assembled the foreground, the sky, myself, and then the moon in Photoshop. I added some vignette. I cleaned everything because you saw the footsteps. And then I did some color adjustments, and once again, some light at the base of the sky. So that's how I created this composite, which I'm pretty proud of. And I think that this is a little bit closer to reality than my other composites. Perhaps, for me, it was important to create a composite that I can look at and, I know this represents a full experience rather than fragments of little experience. For example, with the previous composite created in Peru. So this is another of my proudest image. So this spot, I was obsessed with Stocksness. So Stocksness is a very popular spot for landscape photographers when you go to Iceland. Most photographers go there, and there are some little sand dunes, and it's pretty straightforward. And I've taken some shots as well over there with the sand dunes, and it looks great. But I was just obsessed with the idea to find a different angle or a different way to approach this particular scene. So I was in a camper van, and I spent 2 weeks just coming back to this spot nonstop, obsessed, and just trying to find, a rock, or, anything that could be different as a foreground or in a way to approach the landscape. And there's one time I was just kind of like looking at that rocky shore, and I saw a hole in the shore. And I had the idea to position my camera in the hole. And I was using the 12-24 f4 at the time. And I tried to take a panorama from the hole, and it worked. It worked after a few hours, but it worked. So how I did it was just to stick the camera in the hole and then just rotate it a little bit towards the left. Then with a 10-second timer and a focus point that was as high as possible, I just pressed the shutter, ran away just in case I wanted to use what's outside of the hole, and then came back, and then once again, just rotated just a few millimeters at the time, another shot, and then came back. And I did that for a few hours. And I remember there were two Icelandic photographers just asking me what the hell I was doing. When everybody was photographing, you know, the beautiful mountains, here I was trying to photograph a hole. But this hole actually helped me create something that was different. And I was looking at the shots and I was like, wow, if I could create a nighttime composites with that kind of cave framing this scene, that would be awesome. So I kept going back to this spot, and I photographed the forerun at Blue Hour for one morning, and I will actually show you the pieces now. So you have the cave on the left, and then you have the Blue Hour foreground in the middle. So how I created this composite is made of 3 images, and the base layer is kind of the middle image. So for the Blue Hour shot, I really wanted to have a sort of smooth, long exposure texture in the water. So that's why I shot 0.5 seconds. But because it was very dark, I had to shoot ISO 1600. And also, in order to get everything as sharp as possible in a single frame, if I would have just focused on the mountains, then the foreground would be too out of focus. So I decided to use the technique to focus in the first third in order to try to hit that hyperfocal distance and have everything as sharp as possible. So that's how I photographed the foreground at Blue Hour, which was right before sunrise. Then I remember that was my last night. I came back to Stockness with my friend who's a glacier guide over there. And we just wanted to take some more shots at Blue Hour and perhaps at night. There was some aurora in the forecast, but it was not super strong. But we went there, and then as soon as we started to set up to shoot Blue Hour, the aurora started to dance right in the back of the mountain. So I took some single shots, and I also took a panorama over here, and I just made sure that the long exposure noise reduction was off because you don't want that time to process, because when the aurora is dancing, you need to be very quick if you want to capture everything, and especially if you're doing a panorama. So that's why, because I was a little bit too fast and a little bit crazy, you can see that I shot 6.3 for the aperture, which is not ideal. I should have shot, f2.8 or f4. So these are the 3 pieces that I used in order to create my composite. And then for the editing, I merged the panorama of the cave and the sky in Lightroom, then brought the sky into Topaz Denoise in order to reduce the noise. Then I assembled everything in Photoshop. So I use the Blue Hour image as a base. And then I put the overhanging top of the cave at the top. The reason why I decided just to use the top part of the cave is that I try to merge the bottom, but it was not looking super natural, or it did not really make any sense. So I just decided to use the upper part. And then I used the night sky, and then I flipped it in order to create something that is a little bit more realistic, and then create that reflection in the water. And then I added some light bleeding, which is right at the V of the mountain. So light bleeding is when the light bends over an edge. And sometimes this happens when any elements is backlit. So I wanted to kind of like recreate this with the aurora. I also did some minor adjustments. I did some dodging and burning, and I added some kind of green color in the overhanging parts of the cave just to create tones that are a bit more harmonious and make sense together. So this is a composite that I really love from El Chalten in Argentina. And actually, this composite was taken, well, it's created over a few years. And when I say created, is the shots were taken over a few years. And this was taken from a pretty easy viewpoint, actually, that is accessible by car. And then you just walk about 30 minutes to reach a really cool river. And the foreground was taken with my drone, actually. And the background was taken with my camera, as well as the moon. So here you can see the pieces of this composite. So over the left, I have a drone vertical panorama of 3 images. And then I have shot the moon separately. So the left piece, which is the drone panorama, and the moon were both taken in 2020. But the mountain range, which is on the right, was taken from the same viewpoint and was taken in 2019 when I was doing my other workshop over there. And that's a horizontal panorama of 6 images that were taken with a long lens. So I had all these pieces together, and I just really wanted to create a composite altogether. And one of the reasons why I really wanted to use that mountain range instead of just using that, panorama with the natural shape of the mountain is that I really wanted to create something that has more impact. I felt that the size of the mountain in the drone shot did not represent the size of the mountain that you see with your own eyes. So I decided to do a technique that is called focal length blending. If you have been to my previous webinar, I have explained this technique a little bit, but I'll just explain it here quite quickly. So focal length blending is the action of taking different elements at different focal lengths. So for example, on the image on the left here, I took the foreground at 50 mil, and then I took the background at 70 mil. And then for the image on the right, I took the foreground at 20 mil and the background at 70 mil. So if I just click, you guys will see this is the natural shape of the mountain that would be at 50 mil for the foreground and 20 mil for the other foreground on the right. So you can see that the difference is actually pretty huge, especially when you shoot with a wide angle. So you really want to make sure that you're creating you want to make sure that you are shooting elements with focal lengths that make sense and also that are possible to create. And focal length blending does not work with all the landscapes. Usually it works well if you have a clear horizon line that allows you to cut off the background that is shot with the foreground and then put the other mountain or background that is shot at the different focal length. So this is like another example just to help you understand a bit more the perspective. So that shot on the left was taken at 20 millimeters. And then this composite on the right is a blend of 20 mil plus 70 mil for the mountain. So you can see that the final composition is way more impactful and dramatic. And once again, with focal length blending, some people might use it in order to create final images that are representative of reality. But in my case, it was not my intention, and I actually really wanted to amplify the impact of the mountain. So if we just kind of like check that little mountain that was present in the foreground, and also the colors. The colors were also a big thing for me. I really wanted to create something that was clean looking, and I felt that the clouds were really busy. So that's why I decided to use that clean mountain range without the clouds in order to create my final composite. Also, the moon was present. So that was something that was actually pretty cool to just use an element that was there, but re-include it in a way that was a little bit bigger, and that made more sense in the composition. Then for the photo editing, I merged the panorama of the mountain and the drone in Lightroom. Then I brought everything in Photoshop, merged everything together, added the moon, and then I did some color work, which is pretty huge over here. I mostly desaturated all the foreground and then added some blue afterwards in order to create something that was really monochromatic with only 2 dominant colors, which is blue, green, and pink. And then I did some more dodging and burning, and that's how I finished. the image. Also, I did added a little bit of haze. If you can see down there, just above the valley, there's like a little bit of haze, and that really helps in most of the landscape, in most of the composites that I do. I really like to add some haze just to help add more depth and increase the layers in my images. Now for the last composites, I believe. This composite was created in Torres del Paine in Chile. And actually, this is one of the biggest composites I have ever created, because you will see how many files it took to create this. So I visited Torres del Paine back in 2019. And I was just cruising with my friends. We were in the car and we just wanted to photograph the night sky. So we were just driving at night. And then we stopped at a viewpoint and I did a massive Milky Way panorama. And then we kept driving and we just stayed awake. And then the next morning we went to this particular spot for sunrise, which you can see here. There's like some sort of pink light. So this is the light from the sunrise. So then I did a big panorama of this foreground. And then I had these two pieces. But I also remembered that I have photographed a pretty cool sky from when I was in Chelten a week before. So I had the idea to create this massive panorama with all these elements. So you can see the cloud on the left over here. And then the mountain that is below is called Fitzroy. So that's in El Chalten. And then the panorama, the Milky Way panorama, is actually 19 photos. So that was pretty massive. And then the panorama of the foreground, I believe, is 5 photos. So this is how I shot this entire massive composite. And then I just assembled everything in Photoshop. Also notice how the Milky Way panorama is kind of weird. So I originally merged the panorama in Lightroom. It gave me that weird kind of shape, but I was able to give back the natural shape with a lot of warping in Photoshop. So for the photo editing, I merged everything in Lightroom, as I said, brought everything in Photoshop, added the cloud in the middle. Once again, my intention here was not to create something that looked natural. I wanted to create something that looked a little bit more fantasy and almost too perfect and very kind of like with a lot of symmetry. So this was my intention. So I assembled everything in Photoshop. And then once again, I added some light at the base of the night sky to increase the depth, basic dodging and burning, a little bit of color adjustments. And that's how I created this composite. So this is it for the 7 composites. I hope that this gave you a better insight about the little pieces that I use to create my art, and also some of the techniques that I use. I would just like to quickly touch on some photography workshops that I have for 2021 and 2022. I have some in the Canadian Rockies, Iceland, Patagonia, Peru. You can visit my website, Simard.com, in order to see all the workshops that I have. Also, you can subscribe to my newsletter just to make sure that you have the news when I launch a new workshop. I also have my preset pack and course that is called 21 Shades of Blue, where I show how to create 3 different blue hour nighttime composites. And actually, the first image that I showed, I'm teaching exactly how to create the first image that I showed in this presentation from start to finish. Also, this pack has some presets, which are pretty cool to use on blue hour foregrounds and all kinds of different images. I'm dropping my second NFT drop on Super Rare tomorrow. So if you guys want to check it out, this is going to be on Super Rare. And also I'm doing this half-day virtual workshop with the camera store once again, June 12th, where I'm going to go over trip planning, camera gear, trekking gear, photography techniques for landscape and composites. And we're going to do a lot of live editing in Lightroom and Photoshop. And this is going to be very interactive. So as I'm editing, you guys are going to be able to ask me questions, and there's going to be some sort of like Q&A. So this is pretty much it. If you would like to follow me, I am on Instagram, I am on Twitter, I've been spending way too much time on Twitter lately. And also I have Facebook, Cath Simard Photography and workshops. So this is pretty much it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so we have some great questions that are coming in, and you guys can keep the questions coming if you have anything left over from earlier in the presentation or something comes to mind. We have a few minutes for questions here. So to get things started, my one question is, I mean, you talked about spending sometimes 40 hours on an image, or maybe even more, sometimes maybe months. How do you know when your composite is done and the photo is the way you want it? Is there like a perfection point, or do you sometimes have to settle? Where do you stand there?
Yeah, it's definitely pretty difficult to know, but I like to compare it to when you eat. There's a point where you will feel full and you will feel satisfied, and that's usually a very, very similar kind of feeling that happens when I edit. There's just a point where I know when it feels enough. And you know, you could fit in a desert or like anything else, a bit more food, but usually that's when you start to go overboard. So I feel that if you learn how to listen to your creative instinct and really know when, you know, you feel that it's enough and you actually listen to yourself, that's when you're going to know that you're done.
Awesome. Okay, so lots of questions coming in here. So I'm not necessarily going to go in order. We have Jim Thompson wants to know, which version of Lightroom are you using? Is it the classic, or is it?
Yeah, I'm using the classic. I don't think I've ever used a lower version. So the classic is usually the one that allows you to really do as much as you can. So the
Okay.
classic.
And how important is it to you in terms of camera and lens choice? Is resolution becoming more important for you so that you're able to pull some of those small details, like you had the moon and you're making it larger? How important is it to you right now?
Yeah, it's definitely very important, and that's why I shoot with the R3, and also I upgraded to the A1. It just allows me to be more flexible into selecting specific elements if I want to crop or like enhance it or make it bigger. It plays a lot in the final quality of my composite. So yeah, so this is it for the camera body, and also, you know, a good lens really makes a difference when it comes to image quality and sharpness. So that's why I use some of the G Master series and also f2.8, which is pretty great for the night sky.
Have you always shot with Sony gear?
Yes, I started with Sony. I think I had a Sony A6000 with a small 35 mil back in the days. Yeah, so I've started with Sony, and I never looked back since.
Fantastic. Dylan wants to know if you track or stack your Milky Ways. I think you covered this a little bit, but could you just review that?
Yeah, I don't. I have in the past, but after discovering Topaz Lab Denoise, I just realized that it really saves me time. It saves me batteries, especially when I'm out for you know, multiple days. Then the batteries, they really become important. Yeah, so usually just, you know, single shots are enough, or to create panoramas, which help diminishing the appearance of the noise. So no, I don't track, but I would love to learn. I do have a star tracker, so I might spend some time this summer and then learn and then just play and have fun with it.
Awesome. Nancy Green wants to know, what are you using for your Milky Way panoramas? She's saying she has some trouble matching them.
Yeah, I'm very minimalist. I'm just use regular tripod, and I think I don't use any leveling or whatever equipment that is usually made for panoramas. But one trick that I can give is really to make sure that you have enough overlapping between your shots. Also, just be mindful that as you're shooting the Milky Way, if you're shooting an entire arch, then the arch will be moving as well. So you just really need to make sure that, you know, maybe just to check the previous shots and make sure that you're at least including 50%. And even sometimes I go over 70%. And this is how I was able to create my massive, giant Milky Way, because I was literally just moving tiny bit just to make sure that everything would merge smoothly. So yeah, I'm very minimalistic. So that's how I shoot my Milky Way panels.
A question from Jadu. He's wondering if you've been shooting with the Sony Alpha 1.
I have not. I have not. I'm kind of like waiting for a really good photography opportunity to start playing with it. But I'm really excited to use it. It's just that I haven't had the time in the last few weeks, but I'm really excited to try it out.
Excellent. Okay, I'm just gonna. And let's see what else we got here. I think you did mention it, but do you use Adobe Camera Raw instead of Lightroom? Or I think you mentioned something about how you actually use it prior to putting them into Lightroom. So can you mention what the difference is in your workflow there?
Yeah. I think it really depends. So if I can do some color matching to start with in Lightroom, I will do it. But sometimes if I have many pieces and that I know that the color matching will just take a long time in Lightroom, I will just import the photos in Lightroom, put everything in Photoshop, and then just go individually on each image with Camera Raw. And basically Camera is the same as Lightroom. Yeah, I have to say that usually my process is very fluid. There's no, like, I do have some steps, assembling and then adding the effects, but in general, I kind of just go with the flow. So if I feel that it would be easier to start in Lightroom, then I start in Lightroom. And if not, then I just import the photos in Lightroom and then bring everything in Photoshop and then use Camera Raw in Photoshop.
Sounds good. And then another question about the Sony Alpha 1. With the increased resolution, are you concerned about any additional noise?
It's not something that I've heard.
No, me neither.
No, I have talked about it with a few other photographers, and actually they were saying that it's pretty the same as the R3 in terms of noise. So, improved resolution with the same noise level, I think it sounds pretty great to me. So that's one of the reasons why I'm really excited to try it.
And Jamie Pear has a question about when you're hiking or backpacking, how much gear are you bringing? Like how many cameras and lenses? He's saying, I think it's a he says they're carrying too much all the time. How do you limit yourself?
Yeah. Because most of my stuff is shot with the 16-5 f2.8, that's usually the only lens that I will bring. I've had moments where I needed to shoot some lifestyle portraits, whatever. And I hope that perhaps I would have brought the 24-70 or the 70-100, but it's just so much added weight. So what I try to do is to really beforehand know what I will be shooting. If I know that I will be shooting some more lifestyle and portraits, that I might add a lens. But if I know that I will be strictly shooting landscape, I usually only bring the 16-5 f2.8 with my R3 and probably with my A1 this summer.
Great. And in terms of your history with photography, I know some of us got to hear a little bit about this during your first presentation, which you guys can still check out on the YouTube channel. But can you tell them a little bit about how you got started with your photography?
Yeah, sure. I'll try to make it shorter than the first time. But basically, back in 2014, I was in Australia and I was doing some farming over there. I was working on banana farm and then cherry farm. And I was just kind of like documenting my trips and my adventures with my iPhone 3. And there is a bandana brand, kind of like Buffs, who contacted me and they were like, "Hey, Cath, we love your photography. Would you like to shoot our products?" And I never touched a camera before. I had no idea what I was doing, but I said yes. And with the money that they gave me, I bought a Sony 6000 with that small 35 lens. And I started photography by taking photos of people wearing the bandanas and then doing all sorts of outdoors activities. So hiking, kayaking, running, and stuff like that. So that's how I got into photography, by taking photos of people doing some cool stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, well, and I loved your story in general about how you just went for it and you discovered this passion and it's just part of your life now. and you left everything else behind and just transitioned to this whole new lifestyle. So I love that story. And again, you can watch that previous video all about her story on how she made this her full-time career on the YouTube channel. So we'll get to a few more questions. Who are your favorite photographers and favorite hiking snacks? That's from Ravi. I love this
question. Favorite photographers. I think that what got me really inspired to push myself in terms of exploring more remote areas and more wild areas was Max Rive Photography. His stuff is absolutely insane. He's also the photographer that inspired me to try more panoramas. Yeah, so I have always found a lot of inspiration from him, even in the way he approaches his editing. And as for favorite snacks, I'm going to say protein bars. I'm an absolute fan of protein bars. I'm a protein bar expert. I know all the brands.
Efficiency.
I have a small obsession with protein bars, and that's actually on my private profile on my Instagram page. So I know a lot about protein bars. So if anyone in the audience ever has any questions about protein bars, you know who to talk to.
Fantastic. And circling back again to the Alpha 1, this is good news for you, Cath. But Jadu from the Sony Pro Support team, he's also an awesome portrait photographer. He was saying that, of course, the sensor design actually is designed to minimize noise. And it has a stacked sensor design. And I'm also getting a thumbs up from our TCSTV Dream Team, Drew and Gary. And of course, they love that camera too. I think Gary was like first on the list to actually get one. So,
yeah.
So thanks for confirming that.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So from Shaw's A, he says, if I understand correctly, you perform the color grading before compositing. Do you do another round of color grading after the whole image is done? That's a good question.
So I prefer to color match as a first before assembling the composite. So I do some basic color matching in Lightroom, and then I assemble the composite in Photoshop. And then I might do additional color grading. But also, as I am assembling, sometimes I will use camera raw just to make sure that everything makes sense, and that the color matching and the contrast and the colors, they fit well together. So it really depends on the image. It depends how complicated is the composite, at what time that I have shot the different elements. Sometimes one element will be taken a little bit later, just like in my composite from Peru with the cactuses. That middle ground needed a lot of additional color grading. So it changes, but usually it starts in Lightroom and then it keeps going in Photoshop.
Just part of the whole process.
Yeah.
Now, what about the starting point? We just got an email question from Claude asking, what do you use for your white balance settings when you're shooting? Is it normally on auto, or are you adjusting depending on the scenario?
Yeah, I think for me, auto or cloudy, it doesn't really make a difference. Sometimes the cloudy, I do like the colors, but because this is something that you can adjust very easily in post, I usually don't really pay attention to this, to be honest. I do like to shoot very cold temperatures for my night skies, because I don't personally enjoy just seeing in camera really warm Milky Ways. So because I know that in post anyway, I will tone everything down. I like to usually pick a balance that is very cold.
Yeah, that makes sense. Jamie says that they've been shooting with an A6400 and a 16 to 50 millimeter Sony lens. They've recently got the A7 III and are looking to get a wide angle lens for Astro. Do you have any recommendations on wider angle lenses that won't break the bank?
Won't break the bank. Okay. So Sony just released the 14 f1.8, I believe. So that's a good one. I am currently shooting with the ultra wide, the 12-24 f2.8, which might break the bank a little bit, but I think that it's just such a cool lens, and it really personally has allowed me to create some really cool effects with the foreground, with the cave. So
Yeah.
I think for me, it's definitely worth it. But maybe
Yes,
it's
and I'll
gonna.
give a little plug for something we have coming up pretty soon with Sony. We're joining up with KEH again for the virtual event. So if you have any old gear and you want to buy something new, they're actually going to do some pretty amazing bonus credits for trading in any of your old dusty stuff that you're not really using anymore. And then there's some great rebate programs going on as well. So it's a good opportunity to get some new Sony gear. That's happening in mid-June. So it's on our blog at thecamstore.com if you want to find out more details about that. I'll get to a couple more questions before we wrap up. So we have one here saying, how do you feather the edges when you're merging your images? The mountain lines are so sharp and look extremely realistic.
Yeah, so usually there are different ways to do that, but for the feathering of the edges, if you double click on the layer mask, there will be different options that will come up for the feathering and also for the radius and for the shifting the edge. So I really recommend playing with this. It's just in the layer mask options. But if I am masking myself manually, I will usually use a brush that has a feather in order to cut off the mountain instead of using a brush that is 100% hardness. I might use a brush that is 80% hardness just to be a little bit more natural.
Okay. Well, on that note, I'm going to mention that if you guys are enjoying this event and you want to learn more, you want to get into it, you want to see some live editing of her actually doing some of this work, you have to join us on June 12th for the workshop. Again, the link is in the description below. You can save $20 with the promo code TCSTV. And we really hope you guys can join us. There's limited spots available, and if we fill it up, we'll make a waiting list for a second class. So we hope you guys can make it with us. And on that note, my last question for you is, what is your favorite must-have non-camera gear item that you must bring with you for all of your landscape shoots?
Well, I was going to say snack, but I would probably sound a little bit too obsessed with protein bars. Um, I do think that having that Garmin InReach Mini is very important for me for safety. It just, I do so many solo treks and solo hiking that I do find that it's a piece of gear that is worth investing just, for your own safety. And also it can track. Sometimes I can be in the backcountry and I'm able to, just send like a little message to my family, like, hey, I'm in the backcountry. I think it's just such a cool device, and yeah, it's worth the investment. So maybe first snack, and then second the Garmin.
Awesome. Camera gear, snack, and then safety stuff. Safety third.
And big puffy jacket to
We have
stay
a
warm.
t-shirt for that, yeah.
Yeah, I
For
love it.
sure. Well, and I have to say hi, Jeffy. I know he's from the camera store. I said I would say hi to him. So hi, Jeff. And we hope you guys all have a great night. And thank you so much to Cath and to Sony Canada for sponsoring this event. This was a lot of fun. And again, we hope we see you on June 12th for Cath's next workshop.
Thank you so much. It was a lot of fun. Have a great night.
You too.